So I was talking to some younger PhD students a couple of days ago, and I realized that there was a couple of things that I wish I knew earlier on in my PhD or someone would have told me. So I'm making this video with the hopes that I can give some advice that could help some younger PhD students. Just to give a little background on me, I graduated with my PhD in 2021 in robotics. So I've been working for about a year now. The first piece of advice I'd give to my younger self is the best students, the ones that made the most progress, and the ones that tended to have the best work-life balance and were the happiest, which is hard to do during your PhD, were the ones that approached it like a 9 to 5 job. Now, these were usually the students who had maybe 1 or 2 years of work experience before. So they had previous work experience before doing their PhD. Usually in the US, a lot of PhD students go straight out of their undergrad. I know that's different for other countries. But the ones that had that approach where it was a 9 to 5 job, they actually accomplished more than the rest of us, where we just use all the freedom we had during the PhD. Like for me, there were days where I'd show up at 9 or 10 and then get home at 2 in the morning. And I'd be like, I spent 16 hours in the office and accomplished about 3 hours of work today. And the reason is because when you have all that freedom, all that unlimited time, you tend to procrastinate and goof off a lot and not make the most out of your time. And I know that wasn't just me. That was most students. Most students had that experience where when they had all that free time, they ended up procrastinating, wasting a lot of their time. And then at 6 p.m., they'd be like, I did nothing today. I guess, now it's time for me to actually start working. So that's one thing I would tell myself, and towards the end of the PhD, for some health reasons, I could only work about 6 hours a day. And I realized that those were actually the most productive 6 hours of work that I had ever done because I was time restricted. And because of that, I had a lot more incentive to be productive during the amount of time that I was actually able to work. So the second piece of advice that I wish I knew, and most of you probably already know this, but just in case some of you don't, is the importance of publications. Now, I know there's a couple of milestones. There's qualifiers for most of us, admission to candidacy and then your defense. But, all those milestones aside, your publications are really going to be the main thing that's going to determine your progress and whether or not you can graduate. Now, some people take longer to publish, some people take a short amount of time. But like in my department, which is robotics, you were expected to have 4 conference publications, conference or journals, before you were able to graduate, regardless of when you got them. So it doesn't matter if you got them, first, second year, or your third, fourth, fifth year, you were expected to have at least that amount of publications. So make sure you talk to older PhD students, the other professors, and check on what is the standard amount of publications that they would expect you to have. I know one thing I noticed for my field was that we moved from journals, so long form like journals, to conference publications, probably because of the influence of computer science and how conferences are much faster. So it's faster to get your research out there. So that's kind of become the standard, I think, in a lot of STEM fields. Also, a note about publications. One thing that really helped me later on in my career is adopting something that I came across called the 70% rule. And what that means is when you get to 70% of what you would consider to be ideal and perfect, accept that for what that is and submit that for publication. So I remember for my first paper, I hated it. I was like, this project sucks. This paper is the worst thing to ever happen to science, right? But my advisor was like, it's fine, just submit it, it'll be okay. And now, when I was getting towards the end of my PhD and I had to put together my thesis, I was going through my previous work and I looked at my first publication and I was like, this is shockingly better than what I remembered it to be. I was actually kind of proud of it that I was able to do that in my second year. Because in my first year, I had submitted it, but it got rejected a bunch of times. And so that kind of ruined my confidence a lot. And I basically hated the project, right? So the point to me saying all that is, as a PhD student, you're always going to hate your research, or you're going to think it's bad. Like, you're going to think it's a lot worse than anybody else will think it is, because you've been working on it and you know its flaws, and you're like, this other people are going to think this is great from the outside, but if they actually knew what was going on in my research, they would think it sucks. But the point is that, right, all the little flaws of your research, but that doesn't mean it's not a contribution. And someone else with a different perspective is going to actually be able to see the contribution for what it is, instead of just seeing all its flaws. So that's the second piece of advice. The third piece of advice, and this is probably the most important thing, is that you have to learn how to handle life's ups and downs. So a PhD is not like your undergrad, or grad school in general is not like your undergrad, because now it's real life. You have bills to pay. Things go wrong. You're just entering that age where people get married, they have kids. Personal things happen, and you're just an adult. People treat you like an adult. You're not in college anymore, and you're gonna start having to handle the real world's ups and downs. Like for me, I graduated in 2021 in the middle of the pandemic, and I remember when the pandemic happened, that was like a huge wrench in my plans for graduation, and actually delayed my graduation by about half a year. So it took me 5 years to graduate, where previously it would have been like 4.5 years. The main piece of advice I would give, that I discovered that worked for me, was to break things down day by day and just have your long-term goal, but approach it day by day. So like you probably heard a bunch of times, it's a marathon, not a sprint. Every day, just accomplish something and be happy that you made a small amount of progress every day. And over time, you'll be surprised at how much you can build on that. In conclusion, those would be my three main tips. Number one is have some kind of a schedule. Approach it like a 9 to 5, 9 to 6, whatever works best for you. The second thing is make sure you understand that publications are the thing that you're going to be judged on, and that it's the most important thing to focus on. The other milestones are a lot less important than your actual publications, right? Because this is what gives money. Your advisor needs money, right, to hire more PhD students, and the way to do that is to get publications. And so, and then the third thing is to be able to handle life's ups and downs. And for me, coming out of college, that was not something I was really used to. And so, for me personally, I just try to break things down day by day and just focus on it one day at a time, instead of looking at the big picture and all the things that are going wrong, and just focus on what went right during that one day of work. Okay, so those would be some of the main things I wish I knew earlier on during my PhD.